Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Shadows Podcast. I'm your host, Trip Bodenheimer, joined alongside my co-host, Jonathan Batista, and we're super excited today to bring to you Sha Sparks. She's been generous enough to take some time out of her schedule to join us here today, and we got a lot to unpack. But before we do so, I just want to remind you, if you haven't had a chance already, head over to our Facebook page at The Shadows Podcast and give us a like. And then on Instagram as well, go over there, _shadows_podcast. And our Instagram page is what we're using for bonus content. We have quotes, we have videos, we have all kinds of additional stuff that we have on there. So definitely go over and give us a follow on Instagram as well. But today, I'm super excited. Sha Sparks, I'm gonna read off some of her credentials. She is the CEO, Chief Excitement Officer of Sparks of Hope. She is a certified fearless living coach. She has a podcast as well. If you have not checked it out, it's a great podcast, Power of Investing in People. And then she's also a speaker and author. She has around 4,000 titles, I believe, in and day out. But ma'am, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. And I do just have to correct one thing, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
My business had to change names this summer, so it is now called Sparks of Fire International.
Sparks of Fire International. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
And so before we get started, we're going to have a couple of rapid fire questions. Batista, I'm gonna let you go first.
All right. First off, it's nice to meet you, Sha Sparks. So your first question is going to be, if you could have an extra hour of free time every day, how would you use it?
Ooh, well, of course, I first want to say work, but I think it would be, I don't know, maybe journaling more or sleeping or, just taking more time for self-care.
I think I get that extra hour, but I think I lose it every single day with sleep. I think it kind of takes it back from me. Yeah. What's your favorite Christmas memory?
Favorite Christmas memory. Just actually last night I was thinking about how as little kids we think, we should probably have some sort of present to give our parents. And I remember going to my dad's machine shed and grabbing his hammer and wrapping it up to look like the hammer, because that's what you did as a little kid, right? Right. And he used duct tape for his packages a lot of times. So I used wrapping paper and duct tape, and I wrapped up his hammer to give him for Christmas. And I was so excited to give it to him. Like, you have no idea what this is, do you? So yeah, that was my my best Christmas memory.
Awesome.
Very nice. Okay. So what is your spirit animal and why?
It is a wolf. And why is because I'm always been just a natural leader. Not that I've chosen that. In fact, I shied away from it for most of my life. And yet people kept putting me there. And I had actually, the reason why is because several people had told me that you are, even though the astrological sign, I'm a Leo. So I'm a lion. But they said you're not a lion because you're not standing alone. You're a wolf because you run in a pack with other leaders. So I would say wolf.
Yeah, that's a better explanation than what I would have with mine. I would just be like a dog. I love them.
Well, that's a fun question, by the way.
Yeah, it really is. Finally, last rapid fire question. Guilty pleasure.
Key lime pretzels.
Interesting. Key lime pretzels.
Key lime, I think they're key lime yogurt covered pretzels. I just bought some, so that's what it is. Yeah.
Wow. I never would have thought of key lime pretzels. Okay. Interesting. All right.
I can't have chocolate, so key lime is my go-to for whatever reason.
It's not a bad go-to.
Yeah.
All right. So, ma'am, before we, really get rolling with what you're currently doing, tell us a little bit about your upbringing.
Oh gosh, my upbringing. So I grew up on a farm in the middle of Iowa. And my dad, he was a farmer and also a fertilizer salesman. So he was pretty much gone all through the week. Maybe he'd be home on the weekends, but most of the time he was just kind of a not really around. He was what do they call it? A non-existent father. And I have two older brothers, or had two older brothers, and I'm the youngest. And it wasn't a positive environment. It wasn't nurturing. It was actually, for lack of a better word, it was abusive. And I think that's kind of the catalyst for what happened later on in my life and then to where I am now, because I've really had to heal from everything I've gone through. But for the most part, it was a small town, local gossip. I think I graduated with 27 people, and people knew my business before it even happened. So story of my life.
Yeah. What do you think is like your biggest takeaway from your childhood that has helped you become who you are today?
Biggest takeaway. Gosh, that's a good question. I really liked the small town feel as far as a community. So I can go anywhere and talk to a stranger because I feel like wherever you are is just is a community.
Right.
Right. And I feel like because I grew up that way and everybody, that making new friends or going to a networking event or even going to any kind of event, it's just, that's a community. So just treat it like such and go in and go, okay, so who am I going to meet today? And who am I going to talk to? Where you might not know their name, but they're a human being. And I think growing up in a small town, you had that opportunity to really see people as just an extension of your family. And so if you think about it like that, that's kind of wherever you are, right? Your neighborhood, maybe it's your school, maybe it's your business, or it's your job, or maybe it's your unit. It's just an extension of your family.
Yeah. I've noticed something based off your story and Scott Mason. I was talking to him as well. Tons of energy, by the way, tons of positive energy from him. Awesome person. And then Batista and I talked to Jeremy Kubicek, and it seems like people that were raised in like a farm setting have gone off to do like phenomenal things. I'm finding that as like the common trend in all of these people that we're interacting with. When I noticed you said something about bullying too in one of the podcasts you were on. You said that you were a bully and you've also been a victim of bullying as well. Explain like your hurt people philosophy, which I think is just amazing.
Yeah. So first of all, I was in an abusive relationship as well. And when I got out of that, I started counseling immediately and really started to peel away the layers of the onion that we are. And I feel like we are designed as the core of the onion, and then all of the crap that we go through, all of the hard times that get piled on us, kind of kit those layers onto the onion. And then the really traumatic times is that crusty part when you go to the grocery store and pick up the onion and it's all that crusty part on the outside. That's the trauma that we go through. And so when I started to peel away that, I realized, I was in an abusive relationship because it was familiar to how I grew up. Now, mind you, he was like to the millionth degree of what each of my family members was, even my parents, both my brothers and my grandmother. Like those were my key influences in my life. So he had very familiar behaviors. So I just looked at that as normal. And once I started to go through and peel away those layers and heal, I realized how I was showing up in my relationship with him. Because, I fought back. I didn't look at myself as a quote unquote battered woman. I never called the police because I thought he had bruises too. I'd probably go to jail. So I realized, man, he was bullying me and I was bullying him back. And then I realized it just didn't having that thought process that as a kid growing up, I would get on the bus to go to school because, you lived in the country, right? And I'm like, oh my God, I would bully the little kids on the school bus, and didn't even now, like, I don't even know why I did that other than I had been hurt. And I thought, okay, there's that quote out there that hurt people hurt people. And so I got to thinking, like, once I started to really heal and myself, I started to share my story with other people. And they would come back and they would tell me like they took whatever I said and they went out and it changed their life or their relationship with their family or their coworker or their boss or, parent, whoever.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that, or started to thinking, well, so if hurt people, do empowered people empower people? And it was just such an interesting dynamic that I went, well, I wonder if anybody talks about that. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I started my podcast, was because I didn't find that it was really talked about. But I know that we've all gone through obstacles. We've all overcome something. And it's a lot of times really hard stuff that we don't want to talk about.
Yeah.
And yet, whatever we learn from that propels us to start a business, or propels us to the next level, or propels us to get that promotion because we learned some sort of skill that we didn't even know we learned. We didn't even know we had in us, but it actually propelled us to move forward.
It's so simple, but so powerful. And you can also apply it to even thinking about like leaders that you've had in your career. You have that really bad leader, that toxic leader, and you're like, you can just look at that person and tell they've had a bad experience. They've had a bad career. They're doing this because they've been hurt and burned and stepped over by people. And then you get that leader that's empowering, and it is wonders what they can do for somebody. So I love that. Empowered people empower people. I love that.
Thank you.
Speaking of which, you were kind of talking about, like vulnerability.
Yeah.
And that, I kind of think that goes into bullying, is a lot of times bullies aren't willing to face, and say like, I'm struggling with this. I'm not good at this. What do you think is the importance in being a leader of admitting of your mistakes and being vulnerable?
What's the importance? That's a great question. Well, first of all, I think it gives you credibility. When you are a leader and you're unsure, it shows. And then people trust you less. And there's something about being able to go in front and be like, hey, look, guys, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know that I'm going to make the best decision, not only for me, but for the rest of us. That puts the leader in a different perspective. That shows, hey, they care about me, rather than I made this decision, things fell apart, and then they're going, I don't know what happened. When they do know what happened, they're still not willing to take accountability for it.
Yeah, you lose respect too with that. And I've really learned to embrace my faults, my mistakes, things that I've done wrong. And I remember it was one of the first classes that I was teaching. I told my class something. It was inaccurate information. And I was like, oh my gosh, if I go back up there and tell them I messed up on this, I'm going to lose every bit of credibility. They're not going to respect me. They're not going to listen to me anymore. And I went back up there and I could have blamed it on my trainer. I could have blamed it on the curriculum writers, but I just said, hey, I need to just be honest with y'all. I gave you the wrong information and I apologize, but here's the right thing. When I got feedback at the end of the course, they were like, credibility boosted right then and there, influence boosted, because we knew we could trust you and we knew that you were not going to mislead us and be honest with us. And then there was one more thing I was going to ask you about that. What is like I don't like to use the term barriers, because I like to say it more like hurdles. We jump over them, we can look back and learn from them. But like, what were some of those hurdles in your life that you had to overcome to get you to this point today?
Yeah. So I was probably elementary school age and really realized that I was actually at that point, I think I had started to think about suicide. And I'm not exactly sure why, other than the fact that my dad went from being there all the time to being non-existent, like I talked about earlier. And then my parents just didn't get along. Number one, my brothers didn't get along. And I was the peacemaker between all of them. And I just really felt unloved growing up. They didn't have any idea. They didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know that that was affecting me, but I had started to think about suicide. And so when I was in 7th grade, I was a cheerleader and started doing some cheerleading jumps on a little trampoline. And I landed and my knee locked up and I broke my knee. And from that caused an extreme amount of pain, number one, but also severe depression. And at the time, there was only, I'm assuming, because again, I'm a kid, right? I don't know, but I'm assuming there was only one type of pain medication, and the pain medication made me just extremely ill. So my mom said, well, just stop taking it. So I stopped taking the pain medication, and then I literally would just spend days in, days out vomiting because of the pain in my knee was so excruciating bad. And I had a brace from my hip to my ankle, and I had to walk on crutches. And again, crutches back then were not useful for your body, right? Or ergonomically correct. So I had, worn sores underneath my armpits. Anyway, long story short, I didn't go to school. And it was winter in the middle of Iowa. It's very isolating. We're on a farm. It's depressing. And not only did I get into a deep depression, I started drinking just a few years after that.
And how old were you?
At that time, I was probably 13 or 14.
Yeah.
And I was drinking every day at 15. And by the time I was 16, I got a DUI. And that actually was one of the first times I feel like my life, that God saved my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's my sister, I talked in episode 3 of our podcast about my sister. She was 14 and she had issues with drugs and alcohol as well. What, suicide is a huge thing. It's a huge concern. And what advice would you have for any parent or anyone listening to this who is having, they're going through especially with everything going on in the world now where people are being cooped up, we're creatures of habit and so much of our life has changed. Someone listening or knows somebody who's going through something, what advice would you have for them?
So do you want me to give you advice for someone who's depressed and suicidal, or for the parent to talk to their child?
Let's go both.
Okay. So first of all, I would say, especially now, because I believe it's actually the rates are going higher in this moment because kids aren't being around their friends and, they're getting isolated and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So as a parent, if they're listening, I would definitely recommend that you get involved in your child's life. Ask questions and be interested and literally listen to what they have to say. I think that's the biggest thing my parents didn't do, is that they didn't acknowledge what I was going through or the pain that I was going through, nor did they even try to nurture it. They just tried to ignore me and ignore the amount of pain that I was in physically. And then it became emotionally as well. So I think a lot of times we don't realize, because it's unseen, that someone is going through pain physically. So that's one thing I would definitely ask, have the parent ask the child is, is there something that's hurting physically? Because a lot of physical pain is going to cause emotional pain and mental pain. Number one. Number two, so I actually work with Veterans for Life USA, and it is for suicide prevention, addiction recovery, and PTSD recovery. And also work with After Action Network. And it's the same thing. It just kind of puts resources in veterans' hands, whatever is needed. So for me, it's really about getting them to the right mindset. When you're in a ideation, depression, suicide is what I'll call it, you're thinking about ending your life for something that's temporary. We're trying to find the permanent decision for a temporary situation. And there's questions that needs to be asked. And those questions can range anywhere from, what is one thing that could stop you from doing this? And if someone had asked me at that age, what would have stopped me from doing it was love and care from my parents. A kid might not be able to tell you, but an adult will.
Yeah.
Right? An adult we'll put it that way, might tell you. For an example, if someone is going through something and they have flashbacks from PTSD and any kind of trauma, that's not just anything in the military, it's anyone who's experienced trauma has PTSD.
Yeah.
So if they're experiencing some sort of flashbacks and they're trying to get that to stop, and that is the reason that they're saying, I just want to end it all. That flashback is going to last anywhere between 30 to 90 seconds. Again, it's a temporary situation that they're trying to make a permanent decision for. So the question is to really direct them in a way that gets them to the right therapy that they are looking for, or to get them to the right tool or the right skill to help them see what moves on. The reason those flashbacks happen is not because of the trauma. The trauma happened, and then what happens after the trauma is fear. And that's how your brain is interpreting the trauma that happened, is how fear shows up. So they might have been triggered and don't even realize they're triggered, because these are tools and these are conversations that most people don't have. But let's pretend that, and I'm going to make something up, that they saw their friend, maybe die in front of them, right?
Yeah.
And now they are, maybe they know someone who has COVID right now too, so they're comparing the two, even though someone on the outside might be like, well, that doesn't make any sense. They're completely different. But to that person, it's triggering that trauma again, because they're afraid they're going to lose someone. So for them to just be able to see that it's fear, not the thing, it's no longer the trauma that's happening to them. They're removed from it. That's in the past. It's the fear showing up on how their brain is interpreting that trauma. And it's really important to know that, so that you can get them to the right resource, or to just have the right conversation and say, you're safe now. What's going to take you to stop? And they might say, I just need to stop having these flashbacks. Okay, great. There are resources out there that will help you. There's neurofeedback. There's even biofeedback as well, that is connected to your heart rather than your brain. There's so many different things that you can do now to ease those types of things, and being able to recognize it's not happening now.
Yeah.
That you're safe now. That's the most crucial thing, is to say you're safe now.
And I think you brought up a key term in there too, fear. And, a lot of times we're afraid of the unknown, everything going on with COVID, our society in general. And they think because they have those thoughts, something's wrong. But fear is actually normal. Fear is healthy. Fear is, it's a normal part of brain function. You have to have that. And I think that, I think another thing that goes undervalued is just talking to somebody, just having somebody to reach out and talk to. And that's one thing that's always kind of scared me with 2020, is that everything's so digital and texting, and just the importance of being able to sit down and have like a conversation and look somebody in the eyes is really important. And what you were talking about with with parents, learn to be interested versus being interesting. Sit down and not just say, how was your day? Good. Okay, bye. Sit down and actually have a conversation. So phenomenal stuff, ma'am. I appreciate that.
Thank you. And can I just say one thing about fear? Because you mentioned it again. You're absolutely right. Fear is a healthy part of our brain. Our fear is kind of a gauge, right? So as a parent, or maybe as a child, you've experienced this when you're driving in the car and you're on the passenger side, and they slam on their brakes, the parent reaches their arm over and stops them, right?
Yep.
So that's a physical fear, right? So they're afraid that that person is going to go through the windshield. The same goes when it's an emotional fear, like even sharing their story, even saying, I love you first, or even asking their child, how are you feeling? That's an emotional fear. So fear is showing up, still putting that arm out to save you from not going through the windshield in any situation, whether it's physical fear or emotional fear. And all the key is just to realize that that's fear. It's not something to stop you. It can stop you, but it's something to just recognize and be able to move forward with it.
Yeah. Awesome stuff. I appreciate that. So tell us, you mentioned, working with veterans. Explain to us a little bit about what you do with the transition phase and PTSD and all this stuff you've been talking about.
Yeah. So I got involved in the veteran community about a year ago. And before that, it was on my radar, but yet I didn't know it was on my radar, if that makes sense.
Right.
It just kind of fell into my lap. And so I interviewed somebody from my podcast who had started this nonprofit, Veterans for Life USA. And he was a firefighter as well as a veteran, and recovering from PTSD, alcohol addiction, and suicide ideation. And I just went, so what you're saying is PTSD is not just for military. And that's when I really started to have the question with people I knew, have you experienced some sort of trauma, and how does that affected your life? And almost 98% of people have said, yes, it's affected my life. So then I'm like, okay, so why is it that as society, we look at PTSD as military only? And it's not the case. It's literally across the board. And so I, as a fearless living coach, I really started to see how fear is that the fear is what shows up after the trauma, because the trauma happened and it's back there. It's back in your past, but it's the fear that shows up is how your brain interprets it. And years ago, I had, when I got out of that abusive relationship, I had studied the brain and mindfulness in psychology professor at one of the local colleges here. I'm also a hairstylist, and she was my hair client. And we would talk about it all the time. And then she's created this program called Mindfulness, and her and I worked one-on-one together for probably close to 2 years, and really got to know, excuse me, really got to know how the brain functions. And we only know, literally, we don't even know the capability that the brain has. That's the crazy thing about technology, and our brain is so powerful that we don't even know all about it yet. And so learning that there is this thing called the trauma, and there's a thing called stress, and it happens, and it fires in 2 different places in your brain, that sometimes when you've experienced trauma and your brain doesn't have time to recover, and this is the crazy part, that there's no prescription for it to recover. There's no way of knowing. There's no way of understanding how it affects you versus it, affects Jonathan. It's totally different, right? And every single time you have to have your brain recover at somehow. And if it doesn't, and another trauma happens, like someone that's at war, right? If they're at war and they see somebody get shot, and then they see somebody get shot, and they see somebody get shot, or being in an abusive relationship, you get hit, that's trauma, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pretty soon stresses are no longer firing in the same place as stress. It is now crossing over and firing in trauma. So something simple as maybe having a flat tire, that's a stress. Maybe being late for work as a stress, or maybe getting in an argument with someone as a stress, is now firing in your brain as trauma. Yeah. And then that's how the fear is so intense that you feel like it is happening right then, right there. Like you are literally an overload.
Yep. And it could be something little. that could set it off.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's why I said it could be the flat tire. It could be anything.
Yeah. That's really interesting.
So basically I know all this information. And so, or I have all this information in my back pocket, we'll say. And so last year I was at this podcast conference and somebody I had met had talked to me about my coaching business. And I said, yeah, I transform trauma into treasure.
Mm.
And he's like, wow, have you ever thought about working with veterans? And I was like, well, that's interesting you say that, because I've noticed they show up in my life for the last several years, but I had not, no, I haven't even thought about it. And so he is someone I will definitely recommend to you. If Joe Joe Bogdan has not, I will introduce you to him. So he was the city leader of Bunker Labs out in San Francisco. Excuse me. And Bunker Labs, I don't know if you know what that is. It is a startup for incubator space for startup veteran-owned businesses. So it takes you from idea to invoice. Mm-hmm. And for me, I've always been a huge business person. And so I had actually did Startup Weekend 5 years ago, waiting for Bunker Labs to start in the Kansas City area because I did know about it. And here he is, a city leader in San Francisco. And he's like, actually, they're relaunching in Kansas City in like a couple of months. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. So he's like, I'll introduce you. I'm like, perfect. Well, in the meantime, I had already been working on my coaching program called Spark Your Alpha. And Alpha stands for awareness, a leadership, purpose, hope, and alignment. And it is really to help anyone that's in transition go from, whether it's getting a divorce, they've lost their job, maybe they've got laid off, maybe they've just retired and now they're like, what's different? But it's really to help find their purpose. But I didn't know that that's what it was for. I really thought it was for women, to help women start a business. But after I spoke with that gentleman who said I could work with veterans, I find myself at a networking event a few weeks later with the Kansas City Business Journal and the VFW, and they were talking about hiring veterans into corporate America. And this one particular man on a panel suggested that the presidents of the companies give veterans a purpose every time they hire one. And I thought, wait, so they're coming out of the military when they've been given a purpose, and now they're going to a job where they're given a purpose again. But nobody's helping them find their own personal purpose. I wonder if there's anything like that in the transition programs that are out there. And so one conversation led to talking to the head of the VFW, and he said, that's a really great question, and I don't know the answer to that. Led me to having a conversation with one of my hair clients who suggested I talk to her friend who's a congresswoman. And I actually live part-time in Washington, D.C. as well. And so I said, well, I'm actually going to be in DC next week. How do I get a hold of her? And she's like, oh, just Google her and email her. And I said, okay. And so I did. And next week I found myself in her office speaking to her defense fellow.
Wow.
And I can't make that up. Like
it was like that fast. Yeah.
That fast. Right.
Yeah.
And I just went, okay, I guess I'm onto something here. And the question for me is why? So basically the defense fellow, great guy, the answer is they do not have anything like that because they rely on nonprofits. When they have someone coming out of the military, they have what's called TAPS. I'm sure you guys have heard of that, right? And there's not a whole lot of businesses that are actually doing it. There are a few, but there's not a whole lot of businesses. And so I thought, well, here we go. I'm just going to step into this and trust that, every door that continues to keep opening, it just seems to be like, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And that's kind of how it landed in my lap.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's a pretty good story there. That's especially how quick that that all seemed to fall into place. What, because one of my really, really good friends, he's going through that transition now where he's about to retire, and he spent, 20 plus years in the military.
Right.
What's like a big recommendation or a big piece of advice you would give to someone who's about to make that career move?
Well, start thinking about what you're going to do next at least a year, or if not before, at least a year before you retire. Because once you get out, everything is going to change. And I was not in the military. I'm not married to anyone in the military, but the flag behind me represents my dad. He was drafted to Korea, and I didn't know the story until 6 months before he passed away.
Wow.
And when he told me that story, he said something that just stuck with me, like permeated my soul. He said, I didn't have a choice. And I thought, I've said that before. In fact, I've used that for years when I was in that abusive relationship, that I didn't have a choice. So when you come out of so I'm thinking about that, right? Like, I don't have a choice. When you come out of a transition period, some people think, I don't have a choice. I now have to retire and go on to something else. But the truth is you do. So start thinking about what your choices are before you even get out, number one. Number two, take time. You don't have to jump from one thing into another, because like I said, it's going to be a huge, completely different lifestyle. You might have been called sergeant major or colonel or chief master or something, and the next day you're going to be called John. Yeah, right. Or, whatever your name is, Trip, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to be called, you're not going to be saluted, and you're just a human being now. And there's that huge mindset shift that is going to have to take place. So give yourself grace and time to allow that for you to process, because you're going to go through lots of people who are going through transition go through lots of feelings. It's like the 5 or 6 stages of grief.
Yeah.
Same thing, right? So you have to grieve what you went through, and then you get to also, be in excitement of what's next. But you have to go through the grieving part of it as well in order to get to the other side of being excited. And then you also have to have support. So you have in your unit, you have this community, just like we talked about in the beginning, right? You have a community, and you get out, you don't have that community. You're not around that anymore. You might now live in the suburbs where you're used to living on base. It's completely different. So you have to create that. You have to find that, whatever that looks like. So like in the Kansas City area, and most every city, there's some sort of veteran community. You just have to find it to tap in. Bunker Labs, even if you're not going in the route of business owner, I highly recommend that you tap in just to meet people. They have networking events. Well, they have virtual now, but hopefully they'll go back to in person. But there's so many different things that you could tap into. Even I think now as this generation, rather than my dad's generation, where it was just you hang out at the VFW and you have a couple of beers and blah, blah, blah. And then they don't talk about anything, right? Like he never even shared anything about what he went through. Well, now they have support groups and, stuff like that. And, their local VA can even help you with that.
Yeah. I've noticed, especially when I used to do personal training way back in the day. And I remember one of my clients, he was a 25, 26-year-old retiree. And he said the biggest struggle for him is he went from running a squadron to now he's got a 25, 26-year-old guy that's his boss. And he's like, I was so used to being, Lieutenant Colonel such and such.
Right.
And now I'm Paul.
Right.
And it's Paul, why are you late? And I'm like, whoa, he's struggled with that so much. And I remember before I even joined hearing that story. If people want to find out more about Veterans for Life or Bunker Labs, where would you point them to?
Google.
Google. Okay.
Yeah. Like bunkerlabs. I believe it's .org.
Okay.
And then Veterans for Life USA. I think their website is under construction right now, so definitely look them up on Facebook.
Okay.
And also I'm going to point out afteractionnetwork.org. And that is also a huge resource center as well.
And
What would you say the main differences are between the 2 or 3 organizations that you just mentioned?
So After Action Network, if you, wherever you guys are, let's pretend that you're in New Orleans, okay? So you go onto afteractionnetwork.org, you type in your zip code and whatever resource that you're looking for or any veteran is looking for, so it might not be for you, it might be for someone else, that pops up whatever resource they need. So wherever you are in the country, you type in your zip code and then this resource will pop up that you or the veteran are looking for. So that's the one difference. And it could be anything from, maybe they need their water paid for, their water bill paid for, or maybe they need to know how to turn on their, get their water turned on in their name, or, whatever it is. Maybe they need housing. There's I can't even think. Maybe they need to know how to get scholarships to go to school. Literally anything you could possibly imagine is on this website. And then Veterans for Life USA is actually for those 3 things. So it's for PTSD recovery, suicide prevention, and addiction recovery. So if you've now gone into that phase where you are like, absolutely, I have to get help. I know I'm an alcoholic, or I know I'm doing too much drugs, and you're ready, then Veterans for Life, there's advocates, and then we have partners throughout the country to get you to certain places for recovery, whether that's maybe you need a 90-day rehab, or maybe you just need equine therapy, in your local area.
We'll make sure we get those links, and we'll have those attached with this episode as well. That's really good information, I think, for even my position. I've got about 9 years left, but
yeah,
it's never too soon. You never know what's going to happen, so it's never too soon to start thinking about it. So tell us also about alignment consulting on your page.
Alignment consulting. So I do, like I said before, Spark Your Alpha. And it's really to help you find your purpose, find what's your alignment, how your purpose is in alignment with you. That means your values, your interests, maybe it's where you're at. I mean, like I said before, I just happened to pay attention to the opportunities that were around me. And what was around me was veterans kept showing up. I didn't choose that. And most of the time, excuse me, I got to take a drink of water. Sorry. Hopefully you can edit that out. Okay. Purpose. So alignment and purpose go hand in hand. And what's funny is when you're looking for your purpose, it typically isn't what you think it is. It's something different. When I had gotten out of my abusive relationship, was working on me and just focusing on me and just trying to figure out me. And I had literally within a span of 3 months, I had probably 5 or 6 women show up in my life that were in abusive relationships that I helped them out of the blue. And I realized that my purpose for being in that relationship was to help others, right? My dad had this, chip on his shoulder of I didn't have a choice. He was not a great father. He was not a great husband. And in the last 5 years of his life, he became my best friend. I forgave him and everything. And we had amazing conversations. He just never talked about the experience he had, right? However, because of what he went through, that became my purpose. And now it's my purpose to really help others get through it, especially for people, for veterans or people who are in the military now and getting out. It just showed up. I didn't choose it. I didn't go actively look for it. I just started to notice the pattern. And I think that's when so many people are like, well, I'm in this career for, 20, 30 years, but I'm retiring and I didn't like it. It's like, okay, great. So what are you going to do? What do you like? And they're like, I don't know. But they find one thing, and that one thing leads to another, to another, to another. And along that way, they're going to find their purpose. And that's what happened to me. I was literally doing so many different things and have done so many different things, and just taking one step out of my comfort zone at a time, getting to the next thing, doing the next thing, learning about myself. It show you your purpose shows up to you. But the more aware you are about yourself, and the more aware you are around your surroundings and your opportunities, your purpose shows up. And it's important because let's just pretend that you went through something during your military career, that's going to propel you, like we talked about before, that adversities, those obstacles that you've overcome, those challenges that someone might pay for as a consultant or as a coach, or you might write a book about it, right? Because you went through it, someone else would pay for it to help them get through it.
And the easiest way for somebody to get in contact with you about that, is that through shasparks.com?
Yes. Thank you. That's SHASPARKS.
And we'll have that link as well on here. And how do they go about that? They just log on there. Is it pretty easy to find?
Yeah. So if they scroll like halfway down, I think there's there's 3 little squares, 3 little videos, and it kind of goes through each one. One is Spark Your Alpha. Another one is brainstorming for leadership. And the next one is trainings and workshops. And there's an appointment link down below it. So if you click on the schedule consultation, I think it is, they can go right to my Calendly link and schedule a meeting, and we can have a conversation about it and see if we're a right fit for each other.
Nice. I got to get on that Calendly link. It seems like everybody I've been talking to lately has one of those. So I feel like I need to jump on that. Then, before we start putting a bow on this, talk to us about your podcast that you have.
Yeah. So I have a podcast called The Power of Investing in People. And it is really leaders of small businesses or the military or veterans who have overcome some sort of obstacle, and they figured out that investing in themselves, that it overflows onto others, their family, their community, and their business. And so that's what I have conversations about. In fact, Joe Bogdan was one of them not too long ago.
Yeah, I listened to it. It was really good stuff. So definitely recommend go check out her podcast as well. We'll have the links for her podcast on here. We got just tons of links. This is like the most linked episode that we've ever had. So
awesome.
Go give her some support over there. And then what book recommendations would you recommend to somebody?
That's a good one. And I could plug my own, but I won't. Is there a specific topic that you were looking for?
I kind of like the theme here today with like self-help. So we can go with that. And we will have the link for yours as well.
Okay.
We'll add it to it.
Add it to it. Yeah. Yeah, gosh. That's a good question. I got to look over my shoulder to find out which book am I reading right now. I'm going to go with Seth Godin's Linchpin. And it's different than self-help. It's just kind of a way to see where you're an outlier, that you don't necessarily have to think inside the box.
Yeah.
And that it's probably best that you don't think inside the box.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I've heard of that one before. Linchpin. I think I've seen some people on social media posting that one.
Mm-hmm.
And then final question for you. 50 years from now, when someone mentions your name, what do you want your legacy to be? What do you want to be known for?
I love that you asked that, because I asked that question and I never know how to answer it myself. at the end of the day, 50 years from now, I'll just be 55, right? So, no, gosh, really, I just want people to say that because of me, or because of something I said or did, or I inspired them or empowered them in a positive way, and it impacted their life, their community, their business.
Nice. Keep it simple. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Batista, I think you got something you want to plug with MVP.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I was more of a listener on this podcast. It was really good to hear your story and what you do for the veterans out there. I'm also part of a program out there for veterans and players. So it's pro players. They could be in NFL, NBA. They could be fighters, ex-boxers, or whatever. But they're called, I'll give you their business card. So you go on Google and then you type in merging vets and players. So that's their business card for you as well. But it's a great organization. What we do is we get together, we work out together. One of the coaches in the Vegas chapter, it's majority of the time is a UFC coach or boxing coach or some kind of professional athlete coach out there. They lead these exercises. Majority of them are combat veterans or veterans that have been in combat. So we're all just together, working out really hard. And then after our workout, we like to do a nice huddle. And then we just talk about things that we're going through. It could be suicide, alcohol addiction, drug addiction, or things that we've overcame, obstacles. And it's been amazing. So like I said, I've been a listener for a majority of this podcast because it sounds like you're a great resource for them that I could pass them to. But I will tell you, my appreciation for veterans in the short time that I've been with MVP has skyrocketed. I saw some guy today get out of his car and he had a hat, and I think, and it said Vietnam on it. You know how a lot of veterans like to wear those baseball truck hats, and I had to talk to him. Normally, I would just give him a head nod or say thank you for your service, but it's just different now. When you're part of the organization, when you're part of this group, that this purpose to help veterans. And so I appreciate everything that you do, and that you tackle this purpose, and you tackle it head on. And you don't take the lion approach, you take the wolf approach to it, right? And you're definitely the leader amongst the pack. So we'll definitely stay in contact. But I also wanted to add, barbers, so if there's no resources out there, barbers and hairdressers are like the best counselors out there as well, right?
Absolutely. And and actually we're gonna have to talk offline because I have some ideas for you. So I can't wait. Yeah.
Nice. And I can't relate to the barber thing. But yeah, that's good stuff there. No, ma'am, if somebody would like to find out more one more time, where can they find you?
Yeah, they can go to my website at shasparks.com. You can find me on all my social medias at Sha Sparks, my Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Send me a message, say that you heard me on this podcast, and I would love to get to know, your listeners as well. So yeah, whatever, any resource. And if I don't know the answer, I'm more than happy to tell you I don't know the answer, but I can probably connect you to somebody who does.
There we go. Yeah. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to do this with us today. Greatly appreciated. This was a little bit different direction than we've gone with most of our episodes, but I think it was much needed. I think that there's a lot of value to what you said. And I think there's a lot of stuff that people are probably going through or know someone that's going through. So I think you provided us some amazing resources as well. Like I said, this will be the most linked episode that we've ever had, without a doubt. So, thank you very much, ma'am. Batista, you got any final words?
No, I don't actually. That's going to do it for me. I just want to say thank you. Yeah, we'll stay in contact. So thank you again.
Thank you. And it's been an honor and a pleasure to be here.
All right. Well, thank you, folks. This concludes this episode. Like I said, check us out on Facebook if you haven't already at The Shadows Podcast. Give us a like. And then over at Instagram, _shadows_podcast. That is all we have. Goodbye and good night.